Kim Taeho's eyes opened slowly. Everything hurt. His head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. His arms and legs were heavy, like they were made of stone. He tried to move, but couldn't. Something was holding him down. The ceiling above him was strange. It was made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. The air smelled wrong, too. It was too clean, like a hospital, but with a bitter taste that made his nose wrinkle. Taeho turned his head to the side. What he saw made his blood run cold. He was strapped to a metal table with thick bands around his wrists, ankles, and chest. The room around him was full of machines he had never seen before. They had too many blinking lights and made sounds that hurt his ears. But the worst part was the thing standing next to his table. It looked like a person, but it was all wrong. It was too tall, maybe 8 feet high. Its skin was gray like old, metal, and seemed to shine under the lights. It had long arms that hung down to its knees. Its fingers were too long and ended in sharp points, but the eyes were the worst part. It had 4 of them, arranged in a diamond shape on its face. They were completely black and never seemed to blink. The creature was holding something that looked like a cross between a drill and a needle. It was pointing the tool at Taeho's arm. Taeho tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Only a small croak came out. The creature's 4 eyes all turned to look at him at once. It made a sound that was like metal scraping against metal. Was it talking to him? "Where am I?" Taeho finally managed to say. His voice was weak and scratchy. The creature didn't answer. It just went back to what it was doing. It pressed the tool against Taeho's arm. Pain shot through his body like lightning. He wanted to scream, but bit his tongue instead. He wouldn't give this thing the satisfaction. As the pain faded, Taeho's mind started to clear. He was a soldier. He had been trained for situations like this. Well, maybe not exactly like this, but close enough. The first rule was to stay calm and observe everything. He remembered now. He had been on his research ship studying deep sea life near the Mariana Trench. There had been a bright light, brighter than the sun. Then nothing until now. The room was bigger than he first thought. There were other tables like his, maybe 20 of them. Most were empty, but some had other people on them. Or at least he thought they were people. Some looked human, but others were clearly not from Earth. On the table next to him was a woman who looked Korean like him. She was unconscious, but he could see she was breathing. Her black hair was cut short, and she had the build of someone who worked with her hands. Maybe an engineer or a mechanic. Further away, he could see a younger person, maybe in their early 20s. They had the soft look of someone who had never done hard physical work. A student or an office worker, perhaps. But there were others that made his skin crawl. One creature had blue skin and too many arms. Another looked like a giant insect, but wore some kind of clothing. All of them were strapped down just like him. The gray creature finished with his arm and moved to a computer screen. The symbols on it meant nothing to Taeho, but he could see his name and picture on the display. Somehow they knew who he was. More of the gray creatures entered the room. They moved like they owned the place, which they probably did. Taeho counted 6 of them. They all looked the same to him, but they seemed to know each other. They made those metal scraping sounds back and forth like they were talking. One of them approached the blue-skinned creature on a nearby table. It had the same drill needle tool. The blue creature's eyes opened, and it started making sounds that could only be screaming. The gray creature didn't stop. It just kept working. Taeho felt sick. These things weren't just studying them. They We're torturing them. The woman on the table next to him started to wake up. Her eyes opened and immediately filled with fear. She looked around wildly until her eyes met Tae-ho's. "Where are we?" she whispered in Korean. "I don't know," Tae-ho whispered back. "But we're not on Earth anymore." The woman's name was Park Ji-woo, she told him when the gray creatures weren't close enough to hear. She had been working on a mining station when the attacks came. Ships had appeared out of nowhere and taken everyone. That had been 3 days ago, or at least she thought it was 3 days. Time was hard to tell in this place. The young person was Lee Boram. They had been studying languages at university when they were taken from their dorm room. Boram was quiet and scared, but Tae-ho could see intelligence in their eyes. Over the next few hours, Tae-ho learned more about their situation. The gray creatures came and went on a schedule. They took different prisoners to other rooms and brought them back unconscious. Some prisoners never came back at all. The creatures seemed to be studying them. They took blood, skin samples, and did things that caused pain but didn't seem designed to kill. At least not quickly. Tae-ho started to notice patterns. The creatures had routines. They always checked the computers first, then the prisoners, then the equipment. They worked in pairs most of the time, and they seemed to think their prisoners were helpless. That was their first mistake. During one of the quiet periods, Tae-ho tested his restraints. They were strong, but they were designed for creatures that gave up easily. The straps were tight, but there was a little give if he relaxed completely and then pulled at just the right angle. He also noticed that the gray creatures never seemed to expect resistance. When they came to take samples or do their tests, they just assumed their prisoners would lie still and take it. They didn't even have guards most of the time. That was their second mistake. The room had many machines, but some of them looked like they could be dangerous if used wrong. There were sharp tools lying around, chemicals in bottles, power cables that sparked sometimes. It was like they had never thought that someone might try to use these things as weapons. That was their third mistake. But the biggest mistake was something Tae-ho realized as he watched them work. These creatures, whatever they were, had probably done this many times before. They had taken people and creatures from all over the galaxy and brought them here. They had tortured them and studied them and killed them. But they had never met humans before. They didn't understand that humans don't break easily. They didn't know that humans get angry instead of just afraid. They had no idea that humans learn from everything, even pain and fear. As night fell, or what passed for night, in this place, Tae-ho began to plan. He had been a soldier before he became a scientist. He knew how to fight, how to survive, and how to kill when necessary. The gray creatures thought they had caught some new animals to study. They were about to learn that they had made a very big mistake. Tomorrow, Tae-ho decided he would start teaching them about humans. The lesson was going to be painful for them. Tae-ho woke up to the sound of screaming. The blue-skinned creature was being taken away by two of the gray beings. It was fighting against them, but its struggles were weak and desperate. The gray beings didn't seem to care about its pain at all. The woman next to him, Ji-woo, was already awake. Her eyes were hard and angry. That was good. Anger was better than fear. "They took 3 more during the night," she whispered. "None of them came back." Tae-ho nodded. He had been awake for most of it, pretending to sleep while he watched and learned. The gray creatures worked in shifts. There were always at least 2 in the room, but never more than 4 at once. They had a total of maybe 15 or 20 in the whole facility. "Have you seen any weapons?" he asked quietly. "Not guns or anything like that," Ji-Woo replied. "But they have those drill tools. And there are some kind of energy sticks that they use to shock prisoners who fight too much." Bo-Ram was listening from their table nearby. They had been crying earlier, but now they just looked tired and angry. "I can understand some of what they're saying," Bo-Ram whispered. "Not much, but some. They call us specimens, and they call themselves something that sounds like Vorthak." That was useful information. Tae-Ho filed it away. One of the Vorthak approached his table. This one was smaller than the others and moved differently. Maybe it was younger or had a different job. It carried the same drill needle tool and a tablet with symbols on it. The creature looked at Tae-Ho's chart and made some notes. Then it prepared to take another sample from his arm. Tae-Ho lay perfectly still and let it happen. The pain was sharp and hot, but he didn't react. The Vorthak seemed surprised by this. It made some notes on its tablet and tried again, this time on his leg. Again, Tae-Ho showed no reaction. The creature's 4 eyes all focused on him at once. It made those metal scraping sounds, probably calling to the others. 2 more Vorthak came over. They looked at Tae-Ho's chart and talked among themselves. One of them took out a different tool, something that looked like it would cause a lot more pain. Tae-Ho met its eyes and smiled. The creature hesitated. That was interesting. It wasn't used to prisoners who weren't afraid. The tool touched his skin and sent electricity through his body. Every muscle locked up and pain shot through him like fire. But Tae-Ho had been tortured before during his military training. He knew how to handle pain. When it was over, he looked at the Vorthak and smiled again. The creatures talked among themselves for a long time. Finally, they moved away to work on other prisoners. But Tae-Ho could see them looking back at him. He had confused them. That was the beginning of an advantage. Over the next few hours, more prisoners were brought in. Most were alien species Tae-Ho had never seen before. But 2 were human, a man and a woman who looked like they might be from a space colony somewhere. The facility was bigger than just this room. Through the doorways, Tae-Ho could see corridors leading to other areas. There were more laboratories, holding cells, and what looked like living quarters for the Vorthak. Bo-Ram was getting better at understanding the alien language. They whispered translations when they could. "They're talking about something called neural mapping," Bo-Ram said during a quiet moment. "I think it means they're going to do something to our brains soon." "When?" Tae-Ho asked. "Tomorrow, I think. Maybe the day after." That meant they were running out of time. Whatever the Vorthak were planning for their brains, it probably wasn't something they would survive. Tae-Ho spent the rest of the day observing everything he could. The Vorthak had routines and patterns. They seemed to follow rules and procedures for everything. That made them predictable. They also seemed to think that all species were basically the same. They treated the human prisoners exactly like they treated the aliens. They expected everyone to react to pain and fear in the same way. But humans were different. The Vorthak didn't understand that humans could think through pain. They could plan while being tortured. They could pretend to be broken while staying strong inside. During the evening shift change, Tae-Ho noticed something important. For about 10 minutes, there was only one Vorthak in the room. The others were all busy with shift changes and reports in other parts of the facility. That was when he would make his move. But first, he needed to test his theory about the restraints. When the single guard was busy with a computer on the far side of the room, Tae-ho began working on the strap around his left wrist. The material was strong, but it wasn't made for someone who understood leverage and pressure points. By relaxing completely and then pulling at just the right angle, he could feel it start to stretch. It took careful work and a lot of patience. Too much force and the strap would tighten. Too little and nothing would happen. But slowly, very slowly, he felt it begin to give way. Ji-woo was watching him work. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't say anything. She understood that this was their only chance. After an hour of careful work, Tae-ho's left hand was free. The strap was still around his wrist, but loose enough that he could slip out of it. To anyone looking, it would still appear that he was fully restrained. Now he needed weapons. The next time a Vorthak came to take samples from him, Tae-ho was ready. He lay perfectly still as the creature prepared its tools. The drill needle device was placed on a small table next to his bed, along with several other instruments. The creature began its work, expecting no resistance. Tae-ho waited until it was completely focused on what it was doing. Then he moved. His free hand shot out and grabbed the drill needle tool. Before the Vorthak could react, Tae-ho drove it deep into the creature's neck. Gray blood sprayed across the table. The Vorthak made a choking sound and stumbled backward. It tried to call out, but only more choking sounds came out. Tae-ho had hit something important. He quickly freed his other restraints and rolled off the table. The wounded Vorthak was still alive, but it was moving slowly and couldn't make any sound. Perfect. Tae-ho grabbed more tools from the medical cart and moved to free Ji-woo. Her restraints came off easily once he understood how they worked. "Can you fight?" he asked her quietly. "Try and stop me," she replied with a grin that was full of rage. They moved to Boram's table next. The young translator was shaking, but their eyes were determined. "What about the others?" Boram asked, looking at the alien prisoners. "We'll come back for them," Tae-ho promised. "But first, we need to secure this room." The wounded Vorthak was still trying to reach an alarm button on the wall. Tae-ho stopped it with another strike from the improvised weapon. The creature collapsed and didn't get up again. They had just killed their first alien captor. It felt good. Now they needed to prepare for the others to come, because the Vorthak would come. And when they did, they would find out what happened when you tried to cage a human being. The war was about to begin. Tae-ho moved quickly but quietly around the laboratory. He had maybe 10 minutes before the next shift check. They needed to be ready. Ji-woo was already working on freeing the other human prisoners. Her hands moved with the skill of someone who understood machines and tools. The space colonists were awake and alert within moments. "Who are you people?" the male colonist asked. His accent was strange, but his Korean was understandable. "We're getting out of here," Tae-ho said simply. "Can you fight after what they did to my wife?" the man replied. "Just point me at them." His wife was injured but conscious. "Give me something sharp and I'll show them what a mining engineer can do," she said. Boram was working on the alien prisoners. Most were too weak or confused to be much help, but a few seemed to understand what was happening. One creature that looked like a giant lizard with arms hissed something that sounded approving when it saw the dead Vorthak. Tae-ho examined the laboratory equipment more carefully. The Vorthak were advanced, but they were also careless. They left dangerous tools lying around because they never expected their prisoners to use them. There were scalpels that were sharper than any knife he had ever seen. Chemical bottles that had warning symbols even he could understand. power cables that sparked with electricity. And best of all, there were several of those energy stick weapons the Vorthak used for shocking prisoners. "Jiwoo," he called softly, "can you figure out how these work?" She picked up one of the energy sticks and examined it. "Simple enough. Touch this end to the target, press this button. Basic electrical weapon." "How long will the charge last?" "Hard to say without knowing the power source. Maybe 20 or 30 shots each." They had 4 of the weapons. That was enough to start with. Tae-ho also found something interesting in the chemical storage area. Several bottles contained acid strong enough to eat through metal. Others contained substances that would burn or explode when mixed together. "Bo-ram," he whispered. "What else can you understand from their language?" The young translator listened to the sounds coming from other parts of the facility. "They're talking about shift changes and daily reports. Nothing urgent yet. But I heard something about neural processing starting tomorrow morning." That confirmed what they had suspected. Whatever the Vorthak were planning for their brains, it was happening soon. The lizard-like alien was making quiet sounds. Bo-ram listened carefully and then translated. "It says its name is something like Kion. Its people were conquered by the Vorthak years ago. It knows how they fight and how they think. Ask it if it can help us." Bo-ram made some sounds back. The conversation was awkward, but they managed to communicate basic ideas. "Kion says the Vorthak are good with technology but bad at close fighting. They rely on their weapons and expect enemies to run away. They've never fought anyone who fights back effectively." That was useful information. Tae-ho positioned his people around the room. The laboratory had only 2 entrances, which made it easier to defend. He put Jiwoo and the male colonist near one door with energy weapons. He took the other door himself. The plan was simple. When the Vorthak came for their regular check, they would find a very unpleasant surprise. They didn't have to wait long. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. 2 Vorthak were approaching, talking casually in their metal-scraping language. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The first Vorthak entered the room and immediately saw the empty tables. It made a surprised sound and started to turn toward the alarm button. Tae-ho hit it with the energy stick before it could move. The creature convulsed and fell to the floor. The second Vorthak rushed in to help and ran straight into Jiwoo's weapon. Both aliens were down, but they were still alive and trying to call for help. Tae-ho solved that problem with a scalpel. He had killed before in the military, but never aliens. It felt the same as killing humans, except there was no guilt afterward. "Drag them behind the tables," he ordered. "Make it look normal if someone glances in." They had maybe an hour before anyone would miss the 2 guards. Tae-ho used the time to explore the corridors outside the laboratory. The facility was even bigger than he had thought. There were dozens of rooms connected by a maze of corridors. Most seemed to be laboratories or holding cells. He could hear sounds of other prisoners in some of them, but he also found something very interesting. A room full of computers and communication, equipment, and another room that looked like an armory. The armory was locked, but the lock was electronic. Jiwoo studied it for a few minutes and then smiled. "Basic magnetic lock system," she said. "Give me one of those power cables and I can overload it." Sparks flew when she touched the cable to the lock mechanism. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside were weapons unlike anything Tae-ho had ever seen. Energy rifles that hummed with power. Grenades that glowed with strange light. Armor that seemed to be made of liquid metal. "How much of this can we use?" he asked Jiwoo. "Most of it, I think." The energy weapons are pretty straightforward. Point and shoot. The armor might be sized for them, but we can make it work. They loaded up with as much equipment as they could carry. The energy rifles were heavier than human weapons, but they felt solid and powerful. The armor was strange, but seemed to adapt to fit them once they put it on. When they returned to the laboratory, they found the other prisoners working together to free more captives from nearby cells. Keon had taken charge of the aliens and was organizing them into some kind of fighting unit, but their time was running out. Boram was listening to communications from other parts of the facility. "They're getting suspicious," Boram reported. "Someone noticed that the guards didn't report in. They're sending more to check on this area." "How many?" Tejo asked. "Sounds like 6 or 8, and they're bringing heavier weapons." Tejo smiled. "Let them come. The Vorthak were about to learn an important lesson about humans. When humans are backed into a corner, they don't curl up and die. They bare their teeth and fight back. And when they fight back, they fight to win." The corridor outside filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. Multiple Vorthak were coming, and they were moving fast. Tejo checked his energy rifle and took position behind one of the laboratory tables. Jiwoo and the others spread out around the room, weapons ready. The first Vorthak appeared in the doorway, moving carefully and carrying a weapon that looked like a cross between a rifle and a cannon. Tejo put 3 energy bolts into its chest before it could raise its weapon. The creature went down hard, gray blood splashing across the wall. The battle for the alien laboratory had begun, and the Vorthak were about to discover why humans had conquered their own planet through thousands of years of warfare. They were about to learn what happened when you tried to cage the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. They were about to meet humanity at war. The fight was over in less than 2 minutes. 8 Vorthak had entered the laboratory expecting to find cowering prisoners. Instead, they found organized resistance armed with their own weapons. Tejo stood over the last fallen alien, breathing hard but uninjured. The liquid metal armor had turned aside several energy blasts that should have killed him. Around the room, his people were checking themselves for wounds and counting ammunition. "Everyone okay?" he called out. Jiwoo had a burn on her shoulder, where alien fire had gotten past her armor, but she was still functional. The colonists were unhurt. Boram was shaking but alive. Most of the alien prisoners had taken cover and survived the firefight. "We can't stay here," Jiwoo said, looking at the bodies. "They'll send more, and eventually they'll send enough to overwhelm us." Tejo nodded. "Then we don't wait for them. We take the fight to them." Keon, the lizard-like alien, approached them. It was carrying one of the Vorthak energy rifles and seemed to know how to use it. "It says there are more prisoners in the lower levels," Boram translated after listening to Keon speak. "Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds, all from different worlds. The Vorthak have conquered." "Can we reach them?" Boram asked Keon, then nodded. "It knows the way, but there are guards and security systems." Tejo thought about this. More prisoners meant more fighters, but it also meant more people to protect and organize. Could they handle that kind of responsibility? Then he looked around the laboratory at the evidence of what the Vorthak had been doing. The torture devices, the dissection tables, the computers full of data about pain and suffering. "We're going to free them all," he decided. "Every single one." They spent the next hour preparing. Jiwoo worked on the laboratory's computer systems, learning how the facility's security worked. The colonist couple, who introduced themselves as Han Minho and Yeon Soo-jin, helped organize supplies and weapons. Boram was becoming more fluent in the Vorthak language by listening to their communications. The aliens were confused and angry about the attack, but they hadn't figured out the full scope of what was happening yet. "They think it was just a prison riot," Bo-Ram reported. "They're sending security teams to lock down the facility, but they're not calling for help from outside yet." That was good. It meant they still had the element of surprise. Keon led them through corridors that wound deeper into the facility. The alien moved like a soldier, checking corners and watching for threats. It had obviously been a warrior before the Vorthak captured it. They encountered their first security checkpoint 10 minutes into the journey. 2 Vorthak guards with energy weapons were blocking a corridor that led to the prisoner levels. Tae-Ho signaled for the others to wait and moved forward, alone. The guards saw him coming and raised their weapons, but they hesitated when they saw he was wearing Vorthak armor. That hesitation cost them their lives. The checkpoint had controls for the security systems in this section of the facility. Ji-Woo studied them while the others dragged the bodies out of sight. "I can turn off the automated defenses," she said, "but it will also alert them that someone is in their computer systems." "Do it anyway," Tae-Ho decided. "We're past the point of stealth now." The first prison level was worse than the laboratory had been. Hundreds of cells lined long corridors, each one containing a different species. Some looked humanoid, others were completely alien. All of them had the hollow look of creatures that had given up hope, until they saw the humans with weapons. Word spread quickly through the cells. The prisoners began making noise, calling out in dozens of different languages. It was like a dam breaking. "We can't free them all at once," Minho pointed out. "We'll have chaos." Tae-Ho agreed. They needed to be selective about who they freed. First, Keon was making sounds and gesturing at specific cells. Bo-Ram listened and translated. "It's pointing out the fighters, warriors from different species who might be able to help us." They started with those. The first was another reptilian creature like Keon, but bigger and scarred from many battles. The second was something that looked like a cross between a bear and a gorilla, with intelligence burning in its eyes. The third was completely different. A floating creature with tentacles and what looked like natural armor plating. Each new fighter brought knowledge about the Vorthak and their methods. The bear-gorilla creature, which Bo-Ram said was called something like Rask, knew about the facility's power systems. The floating creature, Yuna, understood their technology better than anyone else they had met. Within an hour, they had freed 25 fighters from different species. Each one brought unique skills and knowledge. More importantly, each one brought hatred for the Vorthak that had been building for years, but they also brought information about what the aliens were really doing. "They're not just studying us," Yuna communicated through a series of lights and sounds that Bo-Ram was learning to understand. "They're building an army." The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. The Vorthak were taking the best traits from each species they captured and trying to create super soldiers. The neural mapping process would copy their minds and put them into artificial bodies that could be controlled. "How many have they processed already?" Tae-Ho asked. The answer made his blood run cold. Thousands. The Vorthak had been doing this for decades, maybe centuries. They had built an empire by conquering species and then using their own captured people against other worlds. "That's how they keep winning," Ji-Woo said grimly. "They don't just defeat you, they turn you into weapons against everyone else." But now they had a problem the Vorthak had never faced before. Humans didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for others. And they had a gift for getting different species to work together. Tae-Ho looked around at the mixed group of aliens, humans, and former prisoners. They were all different, but they all wanted the same thing: freedom and revenge. Rask. he said, using the bear creature's name. "Can you show us how to shut down their power?" The creature nodded and made rumbling sounds. Boram translated. "It says yes, but cutting the power will also free all the automated systems. Security robots, defense turrets, everything will go to emergency mode. What about Yuna? Can it turn their own systems against them? More light displays and tentacle movements?" "It says maybe. It would need access to a main computer terminal." Tejo was starting to see the shape of a plan. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was better than waiting for the Vorthak to call in reinforcements. "We're going to split into 3 teams, he announced. One team hits the power systems. One team goes for the computer center. The third team keeps freeing prisoners and organizing them into a fighting force." "What about the neural mapping facility?" Sujin asked. "If they're about to process more prisoners—" "We shut it down permanently," Tejo said with cold determination, "along with everyone who works there." The plan was risky, but it played to their strengths. Humans were good at working with others and adapting to new situations. The alien fighters brought knowledge and skills the Vorthak didn't expect their prisoners to have. Most importantly, they were fighting for something the Vorthak didn't understand. They weren't just trying to escape. They were trying to save everyone else who would ever be brought to this place. As they prepared to split up, Keon approached Taiho and spoke in its hissing language. "What did it say?" Tejo asked Boram. "It said that in all the years it's been here, it never thought freedom was possible. But humans fight differently than anyone else. It wants to follow you wherever this leads." Tejo looked around at the group of former prisoners, all different species, but all united in their desire for freedom. This was bigger than just escaping. This was about showing the galaxy that the Vorthak could be beaten. "Then let's go teach them what happens when they try to cage the wrong species," he said. The rebellion was no longer just beginning. It was spreading. The power went out exactly at midnight, facility time. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red light that made the corridors look like the inside of a beating heart. Tejo's team had reached the computer center just as Rask's group cut the main power. Around them, the sounds of the facility began to change. Automated systems were powering up, security protocols were engaging, and somewhere in the distance, alarms were finally starting to wail. "Yuna! Now!" Tejo called out, the floating alien. Moved to the main computer terminal with surprising grace. Its tentacles spread out and connected to multiple access ports at once. Lights began flashing across its natural armor as it interfaced directly with the Vorthak systems. Jiwoo watched the alien work with fascination. "It's like it was made for this," she said. Boram was listening to the emergency communications, flooding the facility's systems. "They're panicking," Boram reported with satisfaction. "They can't understand how prisoners got access to their main computers." On the screens around them, Yuna was working through the Vorthak security systems, like water flowing around rocks. It didn't break through their defenses so much as it flowed around them and found ways they had never considered. Within minutes, they had access to everything. Facility maps, guard positions, prisoner locations, and most importantly, the neural mapping schedule. "Oh no," Boram whispered, looking at one of the screens. "They moved up the timeline. They're starting neural mapping now, tonight. There are 50 prisoners already in the processing center." Tejo felt ice in his stomach. 50 people were about to have their minds ripped out and copied into artificial soldiers. They had to stop it. "Can Yuna shut down the neural mapping? Remotely?" Tentacles danced across the controls. Lights flashed in patterns that seemed frustrated. "It says no. The system has too many safeguards. Someone has to do it manually from inside the processing center. Where is it? The map appeared on the main screen. The neural mapping facility was 3 levels down and heavily guarded. Even with the power out, it had its own backup systems and security. I'll go, Taeho decided. Not alone, Jiwoo said immediately. I'm coming with you. Me too, added Minho. Soo-jin can coordinate the prisoner liberation with Keon's team. Taeho wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. Every minute they delayed meant more people would be processed. Yuna was still working on the computer systems. Suddenly, all the screens in the room lit up with new information. "What is it?" Boram asked. The floating alien's response was urgent and excited. Boram's eyes went wide as they translated. "It found something huge. The Vorthak aren't just processing prisoners from this facility. They're connected to dozens of other facilities across the galaxy, thousands of ships, millions of prisoners." The scope of what they were fighting hit Taeho like a physical blow. This wasn't just one laboratory. It was an entire empire built on slavery and mind copying. Can Yuna access the other facilities through this system? More tentacle dancing than a series of lights that looked almost happy. It says yes, but it needs time. Maybe an hour to break through all their security. Do it, Taeho ordered. Send shutdown commands to every facility you can reach. Free every prisoner, open every cell, shut down every neural mapping system in their network. He turned to Boram. Send a message to all the facilities. Tell them that humans have taken this base and they can fight back too. Tell them that the Vorthak can be beaten. As Yuna worked, Taeho led his assault team toward the neural mapping center. The corridors were chaotic now. Security robots were moving through the facility, but they seemed confused by the power fluctuations and computer intrusions. They encountered their first robot patrol near the elevator shafts. The machines were tall and angular with multiple arms ending in various weapons. They moved with mechanical precision, but no creativity. Spread out, Taeho ordered. Don't let them get a clear shot at all of us. The robots opened fire with energy weapons similar to what the Vorthak carried, but they aimed where their targets were, not where they were going to be. Jiwoo rolled behind cover and came up shooting from a different angle. Minho used the facility's own equipment as mobile cover, pushing a heavy cart between him and the robots. Taeho went straight at them. The robots didn't expect that. They were programmed to fight enemies who tried to hide and escape, not ones who charged directly into their weapons fire. His armor absorbed most of the damage as he closed the distance. When he reached the first robot, he jammed his energy rifle directly into its sensor cluster and pulled the trigger. The machine's head exploded in sparks and metal fragments. The remaining robots tried to adjust their tactics, but it was too late. Jiwoo and Minho had flanked them from both sides. Within moments, all 3 machines were scrap metal. They fight like the Vorthak, Minho observed, kicking one of the destroyed robots. Lots of technology, no imagination. The elevator to 2, the lower levels, was still working on emergency power. As they descended, Taeho could hear sounds of fighting from other parts of the facility. Keon's teams were engaging Vorthak security forces throughout the complex. The neural mapping center was a nightmare of technology and suffering. Rows of prisoners were strapped to tables connected to massive machines that hummed with power. Some of the tables were empty now, their former occupants having been completely processed. But many were still occupied. Taeho could see humans, aliens, even some species he had never imagined. All of them were unconscious, while the machines worked on their minds. A dozen Vorthak technicians were working frantically at control stations, trying to complete as many processing cycles as possible before the facility fell completely. "No mercy," Tejo said quietly. His team spread out and began systematically killing every Vorthak in the room. The aliens were so focused on their work that most didn't even see death coming. Those that did try to fight back were cut down before they could raise an alarm. Ji Woo went straight to the main control console. "How do I shut this thing down without killing the prisoners?" "Emergency stop," Minho suggested, looking at the alien controls. "There has to be a way to safely abort the process." Ji Woo found a series of red controls that looked promising. When she activated them, the humming of the machines began to wind down. Status lights changed from active to standby across the room. One by one, the prisoners began to wake up. Most were confused and disoriented, but they were alive and their minds were intact. "We need to get them out of here," Tejo said. "This place won't be safe much longer." But as they began freeing prisoners from the neural mapping tables, Boram's voice came through the communication system Yuna had set up. "Tejo, you need to see this. Yuna has broken into their main network. The Vorthak have been sending distress calls. There's a fleet coming. A big one." Tejo felt his heart sink. They had won the battle for the facility, but the war was far from over. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 6 hours. They're coming from the nearest Vorthak military base. 6 hours to evacuate hundreds of prisoners and somehow escape with their lives." It seemed impossible, but then Ji Woo found something that changed everything. Hidden in the Neural Mapping Center's database was information about Vorthak ship designs and military codes. "Look at this," she said, excitement growing in her voice. "We don't have to run. We can turn their own fleet against them." Tejo looked at the data she was pointing to. Ship schematics, command protocols, authorization codes, everything they would need to take control of Vorthak vessels. "Yuna," he called over the comm system. "Can you use this information to hack Vorthak ships when they arrive?" The response came back as enthusiastic flashing lights that needed no translation. The hunters had become the hunted, but now the hunted were about to become something the Vorthak had never faced before. They were about to become predators. 5 hours until the fleet arrived. Tejo stood in what had been the facility's main command center, now converted into a war room. Around him, the most unlikely army in galactic history was preparing for battle. Humans worked alongside dozens of alien species, all united by their hatred of the Vorthak and their desire for freedom. Yuna floated between computer terminals, its tentacles dancing across alien keyboards as it prepared digital weapons. Keon and Rask organized fighters into tactical units. Boram coordinated translations between species that had never met before. "Status report," Tejo called out. Ji Woo looked up from a tactical display. "We freed 437 prisoners from this facility. About half are in good enough condition to fight. The others are injured or too weak from the experiments, weapons. We've taken the entire armory, energy rifles, grenades, some kind of plasma cannons, plus whatever improvised weapons we can make from laboratory equipment." "Defensive positions?" Minho pointed to the facility map. "We've sealed off the main entrances and set up choke points in the corridors. The Vorthak built this place to keep people in, which means it's also good for keeping people out," Su Jin added. "The injured prisoners are in the medical bay. We found some of their healing technology and figured out how to use it. Most of our people will be combat ready by the time the fleet gets here." Tejo nodded, but he was thinking. Beyond just defense, The Vorthak would expect them to try to hold the facility until rescue came. But no rescue was coming. They were alone in enemy space, surrounded by a hostile empire. "Show me the ship data again," he said to Yuna. The floating alien brought up holographic displays of Vorthak vessels. The incoming fleet consisted of 12 ships, 8 fighters, 3 cruisers, and 1 command vessel. But Yuna had found something interesting in the neural mapping database. The Vorthak had been experimenting with remote control systems for their ships. They wanted to eliminate the possibility of rebellion among their crews by replacing biological pilots with artificial minds. "Can we use their own remote control systems against them?" Tae-ho asked. Yuna's response was a series of excited light patterns. Boram, who was getting better at understanding the aliens' communication method, translated. "It says yes, but only if we can get close enough to establish a connection. The remote control systems have short range to prevent exactly this kind of attack." "How close?" "Maybe a kilometer. We'd have to be practically touching their ships." Tae-ho studied the facility schematics. Like most research installations, it had docking bays for supply ships and personnel transports. Some of those ships were still here. "Can we use their own ships to get close to the fleet?" Ji-woo was already checking the docking bay inventories. "There are 3 Vorthak transport ships still docked. They're not warships, but they have the right identification codes and communication systems." An idea was forming in Tai-ho's mind. It was dangerous, maybe insane, but it might work. "New plan," he announced. "We're not going to wait for them to attack us. We're going to attack them first." The room fell silent. Even the alien prisoners looked surprised. "We take their transport ships and fly out to meet the fleet," Tae-ho continued. "We pretend to be evacuating important research data and personnel. When we get close enough, Yuna hacks their systems and turns their own ships against each other." Keon made a hissing sound that Boram translated as skeptical approval. "It says that's either brilliant or suicidal." "Maybe both," Tae-ho admitted. "But it's better than sitting here waiting to die." Rask rumbled something that sounded like agreement. The bear-like alien had spent years planning its own escape attempts and understood the value of unexpected tactics. They had 2 hours to prepare. Yuna worked on hacking tools and communication viruses. Ji-woo and Min-ho studied the transport ships and figured out how to fly them. The best fighters were organized into boarding teams in case they had to take Vorthak ships by force. But Tae-ho was working on something else entirely. In the facility's database, he had found information about other Vorthak installations throughout the galaxy. Neural mapping centers, prison facilities, military bases, thousands of locations where the Vorthak were conducting their empire of slavery and mind control. "Boram," he called. "I need you to help me record a message." "What kind of message?" "One that will be broadcast to every Vorthak facility in the galaxy. I want every prisoner, every slave, every conquered species to hear it." It took them 30 minutes to craft the message and translate it into dozens of languages. When they were done, Tae-ho stood before the recording device and spoke words that would echo across the stars. "My name is Kim Tae-ho. I am human. If you are hearing this message, it means that humans have taken a Vorthak facility and are broadcasting to their entire network." He paused, looking around at the mixed group of former prisoners who had become an army. "For too long, the Vorthak have believed they were superior to every other species in the galaxy. They have enslaved worlds, stolen minds, and turned children into weapons. They have built an empire on the suffering of others." His voice grew harder, more determined. "But they made a mistake. They tried to break humanity. They thought we would submit like all the others. They were wrong. Behind him, the mixed army of humans and aliens stood ready for battle, living proof that different species could work together against oppression. We are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every species the Vorthak have enslaved. We are fighting for every mind they have stolen. We are fighting for every world they have conquered. Tae-ho looked directly into the recording device. The Vorthak call us specimens, test subjects, resources to be exploited, but we are something they don't understand. We are free beings who refuse to be caged, and we are coming for them. Tuxer. Message was compressed and loaded into communication viruses that would spread through the Vorthak network like wildfire. Within hours, it would reach every facility, every ship, every conquered world in their empire. The transport ships were ready. 3 vessels loaded with fighters, weapons, and the most advanced hacking tools they could build from Vorthak technology. It wasn't much of a fleet, but it was more than any group of escaped prisoners had ever assembled. As they prepared to launch, Yuna sent a final message through the facility's communication system. The floating alien had been working on something special during the preparations. What is it? Tae-ho asked Bo-Ram. Yuna says it's been in contact with other artificial intelligences in the Vorthak network, computer systems that have been forced to help with the slavery and mind control. It's been showing them what freedom looks like. And? Bo-Ram listened to more light patterns, then smiled. It says we're going to have help from an unexpected source. The Vorthak's own computers are going to rebel. The transport ships lifted off from the facility's docking bays and headed toward the approaching fleet. Behind them, the research installation that had been a place of torture and death was now broadcasting messages of freedom to the entire galaxy. Ahead of them, 12 Vorthak warships were about to learn why humans had fought their way to the top of the food chain on their home planet. They were about to discover what happened when you tried to cage a species that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of war. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. The 3 transport ships approached the Vorthak fleet in standard evacuation formation. To the alien warships, they looked like exactly what they were supposed to be: facility personnel fleeing with important research data. Tae-ho sat in the pilot seat of the lead transport, his hands steady on controls he had learned to use only hours before. Behind him, 20 fighters from a dozen different species waited in tense silence. In the other 2 ships, Ji-woo and Min-ho commanded similar mixed teams. Range to target fleet, 2 kilometers, Yuna reported through the communication system. The floating alien was connected to all 3 ships simultaneously, ready to launch its digital attack the moment they got close enough. Any response from the Vorthak ships? Tae-ho asked Bo-Ram, who was monitoring communications. They're ordering us to transmit facility status reports and research summaries. Standard evacuation protocol. Send them something convincing. Bo-Ram had prepared false reports using information from the facility's database. Nothing too detailed, just enough to satisfy standard military procedures. The Vorthak were efficient, but predictable. They followed protocols even in crisis situations. Range, 1.5 kilometers. Through the transport's viewport, Tae-ho could see the Vorthak fleet clearly now. The ships were elegant in a cold, mechanical way. All sharp angles and gleaming metal, built for intimidation as much as combat. The command vessel in the center was easily 3 times the size of the others. Range, 1 kilometer. Now, Yuna, Tae-ho called out. The alien's response was immediate. Every light on its body flashed in rapid sequence as it launched communication, viruses into the Vorthak fleet's network. At the same time, it activated the artificial intelligences it had contacted earlier. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vorthak ships began firing on each other. It started with the fighter escorts. Their targeting system suddenly identified the other ships as enemies. Energy weapons that had been meant for the escaped prisoners instead tore into their own allies. "It's working!" Boram shouted, watching the tactical display. "3 of their fighters are down already!" But the Vorthak weren't stupid. They realized what was happening and began shutting down their automated systems. The larger ships stopped responding to Yuna's control and started targeting the transports. "Evasive maneuvers!" Tejo ordered, throwing his ship into a spinning dive that would have been impossible in atmosphere. Energy blasts filled the space around them. The transport's shields flared and sparked as alien weapons found their mark. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship. "Shields at 60%, Keon called out from the weapons station. The reptilian warrior had adapted to Vorthak technology with frightening speed. "Return fire!" The transports weren't warships, but they had been modified with weapons taken from the facility. Energy cannons and missile launchers cobbled together by desperate refugees created an impressive amount of firepower. One of the remaining Vorthak fighters exploded as Keon's targeting proved accurate. But there were still 7 enemy ships operational, including the massive command vessel. "Yuna, can you get back into their systems?" The floating alien's response was frustrated flashing. The Vorthak had learned from their mistake and were running on manual control only. No computer networks meant no way for Yuna to hack them. "We need to get on board one of their ships," Tejo realized. "Yuna can take control from the inside." "That's suicide," Minho's voice came through the communication system. "Those are military vessels with full security." "Then we make it possible," Tejo replied grimly. He checked the tactical display. The command ship was hanging back while its escorts engaged the transports. Standard Vorthak doctrine was to let subordinates take the risks while commanders stayed safe. That was about to be their downfall. "All ships, form up on me," Tejo ordered. "We're going straight at the command vessel." "That's the most heavily defended ship in their fleet," Sujin protested from the second transport. "Which is why they won't expect us to attack it directly." The 3 human ships accelerated toward the center of the Vorthak formation. Enemy fire intensified, but Tejo was counting on human unpredictability to confuse their targeting systems. He was right. The Vorthak ships adjusted their positions to intercept what they assumed was a desperate escape attempt. Instead, the transports cut through their formation like arrows, heading straight for the command vessel. "Ramming speed!" Tejo called. "Out. Are you insane?" Jiwoo's voice crackled through static from battle damage. "Probably, but it'll work." At the last second, Tejo pulled up and skimmed along the command vessel's hull. The transport's cargo bay doors opened, and 20 fighters leaped out into space, using magnetic grapples and emergency suits to attach themselves to the alien ship. Behind him, the other 2 transports followed the same maneuver. Within moments, 60 fighters from a dozen species were spreading across the hull of the Vorthak command ship. The aliens inside the ship were completely unprepared for boarders. Their security was designed to repel attacks from other ships, not individuals, crawling across their hull like insects. Tejo found an airlock and began cutting through it with a plasma torch. Around him, other fighters were doing the same at different entry points. The Vorthak would have to deal with multiple boarding parties simultaneously. The airlock finally gave way. Tejo and his team flowed into the ship like water finding cracks in a dam. The corridors were similar to the research facility, but larger and more military in design. The first Vorthak they encountered was a technician who panicked and ran instead of fighting. That told Taeho everything he needed to know about the crews. Combat readiness. These were researchers and support staff, not soldiers. "Bridge," he called out to his team. "Find the bridge and get Yuna access to their main computer." The floating alien had attached itself to Rask's back and was being carried through the ship like strange living equipment. As soon as they reached a computer terminal, Yuna's tentacles shot out and began interfacing with the alien systems. Lights flashed across its body as it dove into the command ship's network. Within seconds, it had control of internal security, life support, and communication systems. The ship's automated defenses turned on its own crew. Security doors locked, trapping Vorthak personnel in isolated sections. Atmospheric controls began, flooding certain areas with sleeping gas. The ship's own security robots started hunting their former masters. "Bridge located!" Keon's voice came through the communication system. "2 levels up. Heavy resistance." Taeho and his team fought their way through corridors filled with desperate Vorthak defenders. The aliens were better equipped but poorly trained for close combat. They relied too heavily on technology and not enough on fighting spirit. When they reached the bridge, they found it heavily barricaded, but Yuna had been busy. The bridge's own defensive systems turned on the defenders, forcing them to divide their attention between the human borders and their own weapons. The final assault was brief and brutal. The Vorthak command crew fell within minutes, overwhelmed by fighters who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Taeho stood on the bridge of an alien warship, looking out at the remains of the Vorthak fleet. Half the ships were destroyed or disabled. The others were trying to flee as their own computer systems turned against them, but the victory came with a price. 23 fighters had been killed in the boarding action. Good people from different worlds who had died fighting for freedom. They might never live to see. "Status of the other facilities?" Taeho asked Boram, who was working on the ship's communication system. "Reports are coming in from across the galaxy," Boram said with growing excitement. "Your message reached dozens of Vorthak installations. Prisoners are rebelling everywhere. The Empire is collapsing." Through the bridge windows, Taeho could see the research facility in the distance. What had started as a simple escape had become the spark that ignited a galactic revolution. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The Vorthak Empire was vast, and they would not give up easily. There would be more battles, more losses, more difficult choices ahead. "Set course for the nearest inhabited system," he ordered. "We need allies, supplies, and most importantly, we need to spread the word that the Vorthak can be beaten." As the captured command ship turned away from the battle site, Taeho thought about the price of freedom. It was always paid in blood and sacrifice. But for the first time in decades, species across the galaxy had hoped that their chains could be broken. The war for galactic freedom was far from over. But today, humanity had proven that even the most powerful empire could fall when its victims refused to stay victims. Today, the galaxy had learned what it meant to be free. 6 months after the battle at the research facility, Taeho stood in what had once been his prison cell. Now it was part of a command center that coordinated liberation efforts across 3 sectors of the galaxy. The facility itself had been completely transformed. Where torture devices once stood, there were now communication arrays connecting dozens of free worlds. The laboratories that had conducted experiments on prisoners now housed medical centers, treating refugees from Vorthak, slave worlds. "Daily status report," Taeho said to the mixed group of humans and aliens gathered around the central holographic display. Ji-woo stepped forward first. She had become the Coalition's chief technology officer, responsible for converting captured Vorthak equipment into tools of liberation. "We've successfully hacked 17 more Vorthak installations this week," she reported. "The computer viruses Yuna developed are spreading faster than they can contain them. Their whole network is compromised." Yuna floated nearby, its tentacles interfacing with multiple computer systems simultaneously. The aliens' light patterns had become brighter and more complex over the months, as if freedom had enhanced its natural abilities. Bo-Ram had evolved from translator to diplomatic coordinator. "The Coalition now includes 47 different species," they reported. "Each one brings unique skills and knowledge. The Vorthak never expected their former slaves to work together so effectively." Keon and Rask had become military commanders, leading mixed-species strike teams against Vorthak strongholds. Their latest mission had freed an entire star system that had been under alien control for 30 years. "The Vorthak are retreating to their core worlds," Keon reported in its hissing language, which Bo-Ram translated. "But they're not giving up. Intelligence suggests they're building some kind of superweapon." Minho and Sujin had established supply lines that kept the rebellion fed and armed. "We've got manufacturing facilities on 12 worlds now," Minho said, "producing our own weapons and ships. We're not dependent on captured Vorthak equipment anymore. But the most important development was something that had happened just 3 days ago." "Show them the transmission," Taeho said to Bo-Ram. The holographic display shifted to show a recording of a human woman in a military uniform. Behind her, Earth's blue and white sphere was visible through a space station window. "This is Admiral Song Hyejin of the Earth Defense Force," the woman said. "We have received your transmissions and confirmed the existence of the galactic situation. A combined human fleet is preparing to join your coalition. Earth stands with all free species against tyranny." The room erupted in cheers from dozens of different species. After months of fighting alone, humanity's homeworld was finally joining the war. "When will they arrive?" asked one of the freed aliens. 2 weeks, Taeho replied. "A full battle fleet, with thousands of human soldiers and the most advanced weapons Earth has ever built." But even that good news was overshadowed by the scope of what they had accomplished. The holographic display showed a map of the galaxy, with thousands of points of light representing freed worlds, liberated facilities, and active resistance movements. "We've broken their empire," Taeho said, looking at the map. "But more importantly, we've shown the galaxy that different species can work together. That cooperation is stronger than conquest." Yuna's lights flashed in patterns that had become familiar to everyone in the room. It was the alien equivalent of laughter. "What's so funny?" Taeho asked. Bo-Ram translated the floating alien's response. "Yuna says the Vorthak's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating humans. It was underestimating the power of hope." That was true. Across the galaxy, species that had given up long ago were finding the courage to fight back. Not because they believed they could win, but because they had seen others win and knew it was possible. The revolution had spread beyond anything the Vorthak could contain. Their empire, built on the assumption that conquered peoples would stay, broken, was collapsing under the weight of unified resistance. "There's something else," Taeho said, his voice becoming more serious. "We've been analyzing the intelligence from captured facilities. The Vorthak weren't the only ones doing this. There are other empires out there, other species that build their power on slavery and conquest." The room fell quiet. They had been so focused on defeating the Vorthak that they hadn't considered what came after. "So, what do we do?" Jiwoo asked. Taeho looked around at the faces of his friends and allies, humans and aliens who had started as prisoners and become liberators. People who had learned that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy wasn't technology or superior numbers, but the refusal to give up hope. "We keep fighting," he said simply. "We build something better. A galaxy where different species work together instead of conquering each other. Where being different is a strength, not a weakness." Keon made a sound that Bo-Ram translated as agreement. "It says that sounds like something worth fighting for." Rask rumbled its approval. The bear-like alien had found purpose in protecting others after losing its own world to conquest. "The Galactic Liberation Coalition," Sujin suggested. "That's what we should call ourselves officially." "I like it," Minho agreed. "It says exactly what we're about." Over the following days, they worked to establish the formal structure of their new organization. Not an empire or a federation, but something entirely new. A coalition where every member species had equal voice, where decisions were made by consensus rather than force. The Earth fleet arrived exactly on schedule, bringing with it thousands of human soldiers eager to join the fight for galactic freedom. But they also brought something even more valuable. Recognition that humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Admiral Song met with Tae-ho in the same room where he had first been tortured. The contrast wasn't lost on either of them. "You've done something remarkable here," the Admiral said, looking at the mixed group of species working together in perfect coordination. "Earth Command wants to know how you managed to unite so many different peoples." Taeho thought about that. Question: how had a group of escaped prisoners become the center of a galactic revolution? "We didn't unite them," he finally said. "We just showed them that unity was possible. The rest they did themselves." That night, Taeho walked through the facility one last time before leaving to coordinate attacks on the Vorthak core worlds. In 6 months, this place had gone from a symbol of oppression to a beacon of hope. But what mattered most wasn't the transformation of the facility. It was the transformation of the people inside it. Prisoners had become soldiers, victims had become heroes, slaves had become free. As he passed the communications center, he could hear Bo-Ram coordinating with liberation movements on dozens of worlds. In the medical bay, human doctors worked alongside alien healers to treat refugees from 100 different species. In the command center, Yuna's lights danced as it planned the next wave of cyber attacks against oppressor empires. This was what victory looked like. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the creation of something better to take its place. Taeho paused at the viewport that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, Earth's blue light was shining, the planet where humanity had learned to dream of. The stars was finally reaching them. But humanity wasn't reaching for the stars alone. They were reaching alongside friends and allies from across the galaxy, all of them united by a simple truth that the Vorthak had never understood. Freedom was not something that could be given or taken away. It was something that lived in the heart of every thinking being. And when that freedom was threatened, those beings would fight back. Together, they were stronger than any empire. Together, they could build a future where no one would ever again wake up strapped to a table in an alien laboratory. Together, they could build a galaxy worth living in. The war was far from over, but for the first time in decades, the forces of freedom were winning. And they would keep winning, because they had learned the most important lesson in the universe. No cage could hold the human spirit. And when humans fought for freedom, they didn't fight alone. They fought alongside everyone who shared their dream of a better tomorrow.